everyone around the room has been through their own personal journey when it comes to getting to the point where you're motivated to be here today to come along to talk about something like this. A real step up in my personal journey happened when I was on a trip. When I was on a trip up to Coral Bay and Exmouth and Carragini in April this year. So it was a great family road trip, us and 2 other families. And we stopped off in Coral Bay for a few days, and I went looking for a book to read on the beach. There's only one bookshop in Coral Bay, if anyone's ever been there. It doesn't have many books. But the thing that I picked up was this quarterly essay, Getting to Zero, by Alan Finkel. Now, Alan Finkel is no climate lunatic. Alan Finkel is the former chief scientist for Australia and an advisor to the Morrison and previous governments. And in that book, he laid out really, really clearly the scientific basis for climate change, why we should be bothered about it, if we didn't know that already. But then also, he talked extensively about the systematic approach that we could take to get down to zero emissions, which is what we need to do to keep within the 1.5 degree temperature change, which most of the world's governments have agreed to in 2015 in Paris, is what we need to stick to avoid the worst effects of climate change. So Alan Finkel's publication has since been criticised a little bit for not pushing for a fast enough transition and for the use of gas in the transition. But I think at its core, he's got the message right, which is that we have the technologies available to us today to get us to zero emission. We just need to find ways to scale up. We need to put the systems in place to do that. So I read the book in Coral Bay, and then our next stop was Carragini. If anyone's ever done that drive, that's like an 8-hour drive through this awesome Pilbara countryside. And it gave me a lot of time to think about what I just read as I was driving around. And I started to, kind of embarrassed to say this, but I started to get excited about this whole thing, right? About the fact that me and my generation was at a point in time and a place where there's something incredibly important that we had to do, something which gave us real purpose. And unlike previous generations, this wasn't the kind of cause where I'd even have to stick my own neck on the line and be machine gunned in a landing craft, thank God. Instead, I just needed to find out how I could fit into this incredible transition of our energy system. This time, it was a war, but it's a war on carbon, and it's not about bombers and bombs, it's about batteries, and it's not about tanks, it's about electric vehicles and so on. But there are a couple of challenges with what we're facing with climate change, which are a little different to the challenges which were faced by previous generations. So one of them is actually quite difficult to figure out how you can play your part. So if there is an enormous war like the Second World War, there is a front line, and you can aim for that front line, and you can put yourself in line to play your part. But this is a guerrilla war on carbon, and we need to figure out how we fit into that. The second difference is just the scale of the challenge. This is something which is so all-encompassing and will play out over many, many years. So this graph shows the historic increase since the year 2000 in carbon dioxide emissions. So since the year 2000, I remember the year 2000, I was 18 in the year 2000, doesn't feel like that long ago. Carbon emissions have increased by 25%, which I find amazing. And there's a really scary bit, it's not actually looking back, it's looking forwards at what we need to do if we want to stay within 1.5 degrees. So the black line that you see in the middle there is the most likely path to stay within 1.5 degrees. If we look forwards 21 years, that means that we will have to have achieved a 90% drop in emissions. And I cannot see how that is going to happen without a fundamental change of pretty much everything around us and how we go about doing everything in our daily lives. Not necessarily worse, just different. But the good news is that the world is really waking up to this challenge. So this is a headline I snapped a picture of in the West just recently. 80% of West Aussies supported a net zero 2050 target, which is pretty impressive for a fairly conservative state. Industry is also getting on board. So business pushing for change, and that's driven by the investors in those businesses changing the agenda of those businesses from purely being about shareholder value to now sustainability goals as well. And those investors are you and I, so it's how we invest the money in our pension funds and our savings which makes a difference. And of course, we have COP26 underway right now. So we've got all these leaders, most of the world's leaders, not all of them, meeting in Glasgow to set targets and intermediate targets and lay out action plans for how the reduction in greenhouse gases is going to be achieved. So you can look at all of this building momentum and these things going on, and it tells us that we're in this special moment. But it also creates this question of, well, if all of that's happening, what do I do? Like, how do I fit into all of that? Because I'm not likely to be able to join that Zoom call. I can't have influence that way. But there are actually things that we can do that the people on that Zoom call can't do. So world leaders, they can set targets and they can describe plans for action. But they aren't the ones who are actually going to create the change in the energy system. They aren't the doers like we are. We are the ones who are going to make this happen. And that's really exciting. But individually, it's very difficult to figure out where we play our part. And that was why I founded the Net Zero Network a few months ago. And really, it was a selfish reason. I wanted people like you to help me figure out how I could play the role that I wanted to play in the energy transition. But in return, I want to help you do the same thing. And I think the hypothesis here is that by all of us who are here today working together, we can each find how we can play our part in this war on carbon. Now, we had the first meeting in July where we went in some depth into the technology involved in the energy transition. And since then, in the background, a few of us, myself, Steve, Chris and Alan, we've been busy, if you can call it busy. What we've actually been doing is having coffee with as many people in Perth who have got decarbonisation in their job title as possible. Well, it's been really interesting. The reason that we've been doing that is because we want to understand, we want to map out what is happening within Perth here, what projects are going on, what organisations are involved. And we got to the point on, I don't know how, the 10th meeting where people were starting to suggest people that we should go and talk to about this who we had already spoken to. And so at that point we felt we'd probably been around the houses enough and we had a pretty good idea of what was going on. So part of this session today is just to share some of those learnings. We don't pretend to be experts in any of this stuff, but we want to share with you what we've learned, particularly in the WA context, because that's a bit harder for you just to go and Google. And one of the ways in which we want to do that is in terms of the technology. So because this is a group which is more focused on how we can be part of the solution, as opposed to how we can politically advocate for change, because I think a lot of people are doing a good job of that already, naturally that takes us towards technology. This is a great report which talks about the 10 enabling technologies to make a difference in the transition. Well worth a look up. Two of them in particular kept coming up in the discussions that we were having with different people. So the first one, for good or ill, depending on your opinion, was carbon capture and storage. Lots of people talking about that at the moment and the role that it may have to play. The other one, of course, was green hydrogen. So there's incredible mammoth projects being proposed at the moment to generate hydrogen or ammonia, a derivative of hydrogen, which will be used as a way to export the amazing renewable energy resources we have, so the sun and the wind that we have available to us in the space, turn that into an energy product which we can ship around the world, just like we do with LNG at the moment. So the first session this evening will be 3 parallel breakout sessions where myself, Chris, and Alan will share what we've learned in these 2 areas, and one more which came up quite a bit, which was the question of carbon credits and offsetting, and what role that has in helping individuals and organisations get to net zero. So you might be looking at those 3 things, and they might start to elicit some sort of emotive reaction in you. So you might look at carbon capture and storage and start thinking, I don't believe in any of that. I think it's just some form of greenwashing by the fossil fuel industry. It's technology which will never work. Or you might look at green hydrogen and think that this is a pipe dream which will never become economically viable and is a distraction from what we really need to do on net zero. So that is going to create tensions amongst us and amongst the group. And those kinds of tensions are being played out more generally within Perth and within WA as well. 2 different institutions, very, very important in WA. So Woodside are talking about green hydrogen, but they're also talking about the production of hydrogen from existing gas and the capture of that hydrogen, so what they call blue hydrogen. They think that can be part of the energy transition solution. On the other hand, we have Andrew Forrest, who is vehement that that is just the last grasp of the fossil fuel industry. So it's really shaping up to be this boxing match between blue and green hydrogen. And if we think about the individuals who are involved in both of those organisations, there's actually probably more in common in their goals than you would think. So they both want to build an economically successful business. They want to build a sustainable business for the long term. And to give them the benefit of the doubt, I don't think any of them are particularly interested in trashing the planet. In fact, I think most of them are good people who want to do the opposite. So as a society, we're going to need to find a way to work together, even though we've got differences of opinions of how to approach this problem, to create the kind of solutions and the kind of future that we're after. And we need to do that as a group as well. And so that's what the second part of the session today is all about. So Steve Barrett, Steve, you can raise your hand, who's a professional organisational coach, has very kindly volunteered his time today. And he's going to take us through a structured session to really nail what the why is for this group. Why are we all here? What's the commonality in the goals that we want to achieve? And how are we going to go about that? What are the things that we can do together? Is it just a case of sharing information? Are there other kinds of activities that we want to do? How do we want to structure this to have the kind of impact that we want to have? So, 2 sessions. First one is 20 minutes. It's 3 parallel sessions. I will be over by that whiteboard on this side of the wall. Alan and Chris will be on the other side. So I'll be talking about carbon capture and storage. Alan, you will be on... No, you're carbon capture and storage. Sorry, get it right. I'm carbon offsetting. And Chris, that leaves green hydrogen for you. Okay, good. So I'll set a timer. Once we get to the end of those sessions, we'll then all come back together and then we'll move into Steve's session. It's going to be fairly fast-paced because we don't have that much time this evening. And then at the very end, we'll come together and we'll draw some conclusions about what we do with all this next. Make sure you sustain yourself in this process. So there's loads of pizza still over there. There's water, which we can debate afterwards whether or not it should be in a plastic bottle. I've already spoken to people about that. Yeah, enjoy it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I hope that we all get a lot out of this process. Great. Let's get into it. Thank you. Thanks.